Hey, y'all. Welcome to the Common Good Podcast. Great to have you here. October 1st already, sort of. And on the Common Good, yes, right. Let's head over to a coffee shop and get a pumpkin latte. Hey, on the Common Good Podcast, we talk about politics on Tuesdays, and often on Wednesdays we like to talk with people about the characteristics of the faith that some of us are trying to pursue, for some of us the characteristics of the faith that we're trying to hold. And we're super excited for our conversation today with Brian Recker. Brian is a former pastor and an author, and has put out a book just this week called Hellbent: How the Fear of Hell Holds Back. Sorry, I'm reading it off the screen, and all the words are right there.
Get it right.
They're right there, and I still can't read them. How the fear of hell holds Christians back from a spirituality of love. So, Brian, thanks a lot for chatting with us today.
It's good to be here, Doug. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. So you're now an author, and you've written a book about hell. All right. So quick synopsis of the book so people know what they're going to be getting into. And then let's talk about how you ended up writing a book about this and why this topic matters for you so much. The book's broken into 3 sections: a little background, a little what we could do, and something that calls us forward. So give us a quick recap of what you're doing with Hellbent and why you wrote it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of great books on hell. I love David Bentley Hart's book, That All Shall Be Saved. Obviously, Rob Bell, I think a lot of people on your show will be a fan of Rob, and his book, Love Wins, was a major work about a decade ago. Mm-hmm. Something that I felt like was important, because I talk a lot on my platform on Instagram about the fact that I don't believe hell is a real place. And that really throws some people for a loop. And one of the most common questions I get is, if there's no hell, why did Jesus live? Why did Jesus die? People, it's not enough to just say, hey, the Bible says some things about hell that maybe you weren't taught, and there's more to the story, and actually this might be metaphorical. If you do that, for a lot of people, you are literally ripping the foundation out from under their Christianity, because hell is not just one doctrine amongst many doctrines. For many people, it is the why for the whole system. Many of us learned a story of Christianity that was essentially a story about punishment. Mm-hmm. It was a story about a punishing God who had to punish somebody. It was either going to be Jesus or you. Yep. And the punishment had to land somewhere. And once you realize, hey, God's not a punisher. This is not about avoiding punishment. This is good news for this life. This is not an afterlife message. This is a message about the future of humanity and the kind of societies we create. This is a real world message. For a lot of people, that doesn't even feel like Christianity. So for me, this book does talk about what the Bible actually says about hell. But beyond that, I wanted to talk about how the whole Christianity that many of us in conservative evangelicalism especially inherited, the whole thing was hell-bent. In other words, twisted by fear of punishment, and a centering on the afterlife at the expense of this life. And so not only does this book hopefully help people reframe some of the passages about punishment and damnation, but also give them new lenses to view the Christian story that doesn't put the afterlife and punishment avoidance at the center. As well, I talk about how this shaped our spirituality, because in my growing up, hell was quite front and center as a fundamentalist. And the reality is that when we have a punishing view of God, when we believe that we ourselves were born worthy of damnation, and when we believe that our neighbors need to be saved, need to be converted to believe what we believe, that does fundamentally alter our whole spirituality. So hell doesn't just twist up Christian doctrine. It actually twists up our very relationship with God, others, and ourselves. So
and you could almost imagine how someone would say, I can treat my non-religious or non-adherent neighbor kind of any way you want, because it's not as severe as what God's going to ultimately do, right? Like if God is your standard for how you should behave. I remember Jay Baker once said, I don't know if you know who that is, but Jay Baker was a person that operates on the internet and is a pastor and so on. And Jay once said, it's as if Jesus needs to say to God, practice what I preached and love your enemies, and bless those who persecute you.
God needs to take God's own advice for sure.
Yeah.
That's a great point. I point out in the book that hell is it's like a trump card when it comes to love. It twists the very meaning of love. The title Hellbent, I think, is pretty appropriate because in so many ways, so much of our expression as Christians is bent by hell. So we believe that the most important thing is love, but if God is love and God is a punisher, that means that our love can include punishment.
That's it.
And so, I give the example, which is unfortunately such a common example of parents who cut off their children or refuse to even go to their children's weddings if they're getting married as queer people, right? They don't even go to their kids' queer weddings. And what they'll often say, and I've heard this dozens and dozens of times from my queer friends, their parents will say to them, listen, I love you. I'm doing this because I love you, but I can't condone a lifestyle that's going to lead you to hell. And so in other words, hell becomes a trump card to really twist the very nature of love into something that doesn't feel like love at all, because the greater love is to save somebody from hell.
Yeah.
And
look, that's not only true in our context with same-sex marriages. My wife's parents got married 1963. She was Catholic. He was Lutheran. She was pregnant. Their parents wouldn't come to the wedding because they could not condone a Lutheran marrying a Catholic in South Dakota.
That's such a perfect example.
Like, this stuff has been around an awfully long time. And I mean, you do a beautiful job in the book of suggesting that, I mean, when people have said to you, like, you start the book with a story of a friend saying to you after you went to church, like, hey, if you don't believe in hell, what are you doing going to church like this? I just don't get the fun. Like, what's the payoff?
Have to go?
Yeah. What's the payoff?
And that's the thing. There's a have to. For those of us who learned, I point this out to people. I say, okay, you grew up in Christianity. Were you ever saved or converted or born again? Did you ever have that sort of experience? And most people, they did. And then I'll ask them, okay, when you made that decision to become a Christian, to be born again, to put your faith in Jesus, was hell a part of your mental model? Yeah. Were you told that if you did not become a Christian, you would go to hell? And the answer is almost always yes, because that was the story that we received. So it was a fundamentally coercive decision, which was really not a choice at all, especially when we're talking about a young child.
Yes.
And so there has always been a have to for people. And so for this person who I opened the book with this story of a friend who said, if you don't believe in hell, why do you even go to church? For her, church was a have to. Of course, I should go to church just in case, because I wouldn't want to, be on the hook for this sort of punishment. And once you remove that punishment, once there is no threat, for some people, the entire reason for their Christianity and religion is gone. And then you realize, oh, this wasn't about love at all. And it can't be about love at all when the threat looms that large. Yep. And some people want to have it both ways. Evangelicals will tell you, of course, it's all about love, but yeah, it is also about the afterlife. But the problem with that is that there's nothing worse than hell. It is the most horrific thing you could possibly imagine. It is literally to say that people would not experience that as coercion when you're literally saying that it is an eternal reality of eternal conscious torment. That's not like my name for it. That's the actual name that the people who hold the position use.
That's right.
It's eternal conscious, just aware of suffering for literally forever. And to say that is not going to influence people's understanding of God or what it means to be a Christian, it's manipulative. And you can see in that example that you gave how the goalposts are always moving. So for, in previous generations, like, oh, you can't marry a Lutheran or a Catholic. And so it's used to control that. But then now maybe people don't care about that anymore, but it's the gay thing. So it's always used as a control mechanism. But what's being targeted is going to change culturally. But that reality, you'll always have that means to control people, to point them wherever you want to point them.
Yeah, so well said. Did you ever believe in hell yourself?
Oh yeah, I mean, I believed in hell just like I believed in God. I learned about hell when I learned about God.
Did it seem like it was coercive to you in your own thinking? Like, did you think this is manipulative, coercive, threat, and trauma producing? And did you have any of those thoughts when you were more comfortable
because
with the notion of hell?
So I was raised not even in evangelicalism. I was actually raised in fundamentalism. And so while in many evangelical churches, hell is kind of, it's on the statement of faith, and you'll maybe hear about it every once in a while. It's typically, seeker sensitive, and they're not talking about on Sunday mornings, but it is the fundamental assumption underneath everything that's happening, even though they're not talking about it a lot. What I grew up in, it was front and center. It was being talked about a lot in fundamentalism. Even though fundamentalists and evangelicals actually have very similar theology when it comes to especially the afterlife, maybe a little bit more leeway extended to like Catholics in evangelicalism. I grew up being told like Catholics were going to hell. Everybody that wasn't kind of our way was going to hell. And I learned about this before my memories even begin. I mean, when I learned about God, I learned about the consequences for not being in a relationship with God, right? And so even the idea of being in a relationship with God, which is such a common evangelical phrase, I like to point out, for all their talk of, oh, it's not a religion, it's a relationship. For most evangelicals, that relationship begins with coercion in a way that they might not even be fully aware of. It's like if you have any relationship, but you're told that you'd be punished for not being in that relationship, then you can't really fully say that this is a relationship of pure love. And so I was in that relationship with God from before. I got saved in my dad's office as a 5-year-old. I vaguely remember the experience, and I know.
Did you turn from your life of sin right there? Did you leave it behind? Did you take your wily ways and leave them in the ditches of?
I remember as a kid enumerating my sins, at communion time, like hearing about the consequences for, drinking the cup in an unworthy manner and sitting there thinking like, oh, what did I do this week? And, I'm like 7, right? And I'm hoping that, the age of accountability is 9, just in case something would happen to me. I'm hoping that that I still had some time to be in my grace period, because hell did loom quite large for me as a kid.
Yeah. And look, okay, can I tell you a little story? And I'd love to hear your reaction, how you respond to this. Back in, I don't know, 2006 or something like that, I was going around with a lot of other people in our sort of emerging church world, and we were saying things similar to this. And a particular person ran a big website and all this stuff and really called us all out as heretics. And he wanted to have a debate about hell. So I flew out to Portland, and we're in a place with a big crowd of people from his world. It's called Pirate Christianity or something. He's probably still around. And it was a formal debate structure, right? So like opening statements in front of a live crowd. So opening statements, each of us, then a response, and then a rebuttal, and then something from the crowd. So we go through this whole thing, and curiously, he made a bunch of kind of like wordplay hell jokes, sort of, and people would laugh in the crowd. And I remember part of my opening statement after his opening statement, which was quite humorous, but I said, it doesn't seem to me that the concept we're talking about should be ever kind of laughable amongst people who hold the view. I think if you don't hold the view, you can maybe have a little hell, wordplay, but if you do, it seems awfully off-putting. So we have this whole conversation. At the end, this person raises her hand and she said, hey, I'm really shaken right now because I came in here thinking you were all wrong and there's no way I was going to believe you. And now I'm not sure I believe in hell. And her voice starts to crack. She starts to tear up and she said, but now I feel like I'm going to leave here and I don't know if I can believe God is going to ever do anything about all the wrongs in the world. And I felt this deep sense in my gut. The function of a concept of hell for her was God was going to make the wrong things right. She went on to describe how she had been hurt and harmed by people and said, I've always held on to hell because not because I want anyone to suffer, but because I want God to be able to fix those. Someone has to defend the defenseless. And I realized in that moment that what I was doing, the function, the concept of hell had in my construct, made it removable. But for her, it was holding up something that wasn't just her Christian doctrine. It was, well, then how is God ever going to fix anything? Because so I'm sure you've heard that. I'm sure you've wrestled with that. Like, what's the alternative to ultimately, for people who want God to be the ultimate purifier or judge, or I don't know, put your phrase in there, for the most atrocious things that human beings have done to one another? How do you construct a Christianity around that?
So I hear that, and I think that is probably just about the only valid critique I think that I've heard for kind of coming against like a no hell, a purely no hell doctrine. I believe hell is a metaphor, and so I believe in a just God. I don't believe punishment and justice are interchangeable. So I do think we need to do a little work on that. I think in our society, when I often talk about hell, that people say, well, don't you believe in justice? Don't you believe that justice must be served? And I always point out, I think you're getting punishment and justice confused, because actually God's justice is always towards reconciliation and restoration. And that might include correction and discipline, but the end is always reconciliation. The end is the beloved community, and victim and perpetrator alike being made whole. Yeah. And so I think that's the end that we should long for, and I think that's the end in God's heart as well. And so I am quite agnostic on the specifics, to be honest. I don't think we get, and I don't think we should even say, I don't in the book. So spoiler alert, I don't tell you what happens when you die in the book, because I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows. And I think anybody who claims to know exactly what happens when you die is either selling something, or they, out of fear, think that they have to manufacture certainty about that, about something that we can't be certain of. So I know who God is, and God is revealed in Jesus for me. And one thing I know about Jesus is Jesus never punished anyone. Jesus longed for restoration. Even the people nailing him to the cross, he actually saw their spiritual blindness, and he called on Father to forgive them because they don't know what they're doing, that ignorance. So a few things. First of all, even Hitler, who you might say, lived one of the most wicked lives imaginable, I don't think even someone like that deserves a never-ending punishment. So the hell that we were given doesn't really make sense. The punishment does not fit the crime. The idea of 3 billion years in, the torture has only just begun. He's got 10 trillion years more, and even then, that's still scratching the surface. I think even the worst abusers, that doesn't make sense. Just on a pure, even if you see justice as punishment, that punishment doesn't fit the crime. So I leave room certainly for, some universalists believe in a purgatorial situation that makes room for that. 1 Corinthians 3 talks about people being saved as through fire. And this is not a fire of torment, but actually a fire that burns away everything false and that exposes. I think a lot of times what we actually want is the truth to come out. I think I mentioned in the book, when I talk about this question of justice, I use as an example, I think one of the best historical examples of this was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that Desmond Tutu did in South Africa following the fall of apartheid. And apartheid, talk about abuse and horrors. I mean, the white supremacists in South Africa committed atrocities against the black population during apartheid and as it fell. And after the fall of apartheid, there was this desire for justice and punishment. And this was a righteous anger that was in many people. But then other people were like, well, we just need to move on and heal as a country. And so we can't dwell on all these injustices because we just need to move on. And so what Tutu set up was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and it was based on the truth. And so what basically happened was the perpetrators of these various crimes could receive full amnesty if they got on a microphone on television and said what they did. And so they only received amnesty if they totally owned up to what they did. And then there actually was not punishment. But that provided some catharsis for people, that their pain was seen and validated. What they went through, the country mourned it together. It was grieved. And then on the other side of that truth was not punishment, but reconciliation. And so I think that's a good model for even what I think might be happening there a little bit in 1 Corinthians 3, where it talks about the fire exposing. I don't have the passage in front of me, and I'm actually not that good at Bible memorization, but the passage essentially says that that even when everything's burned up, for some people, they have done so much wrong, and they have believed so many lies that their true self, I think, is cocooned in layers and layers of the false self. And all of that that is false will be burned away. But I think even the divine spark remains. I see the image of God in everybody. Every single person is an image bearer of God, and that means is infinitely valuable. And that means they are God's beloved creation. And that means that it would be a tragedy if they endured infinite separation and suffering from God.
Yeah.
That's not a good end to the story for anybody. And so I think a deeper longing for what we want is we do long, like she said, she wants God to fix it. And I think that's the good news of the gospel, is not that God's going to punish everyone, but that God's going to fix everyone. And I think that where this is all headed is that God will be all in all, and all things will be reconciled together to God.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what I try to say to her as well. And try to say is that there's a different imagination about wholeness and healing. And if you switch the metaphor from a judicial metaphor and a punishment metaphor and a prison metaphor, which a lot of us have infused God and whatever with, and instill the belief in this country especially, somehow that punishment brings out goodness. It's just really hard for us to believe, what some of our Christian teaching tells us, which is that God's kindness leads us to repentance, not God's.
At every
God's
level,
punishment.
our politics is a politics of punishment. And the conservative politics that I was raised on, it is austerity. It is, homeless people, what they really, like, you can't just give good people, you can't just give people good things, because that won't make them better. You have to they have to be punished into becoming better. And that is such a twisted way. That's not how God works. That's not how love works.
And then the same mouth says, but the love of God and the grace of God is on, you can't earn that. So the ultimate thing of so look, we're all, you let any of us talk long enough and you start to find the hiccups and the hypocrisy inside of our belief systems. But some people, it's just right on the surface. And there's so much conflicting narrative inside of Christianity. So you have taken to, like, some people use heaven and hell like a on-off light switch. I believe it, or I switch the switch off. I don't believe it. Some people have a dimmer where they're like, well, I used to believe it white hot. Now I'm not totally sure. Maybe not everybody. I don't know. People start sliding that bright light of belief down a little more until they finally shut it off. And some people really want to work their way through the belief. You have structured Hellbent, an entire book, trying to lead people to switch the question of, do you have a Christianity without hell, to you basically suggesting you can't really have a Christianity Jesus's way with hell. Like you've sort of reversed the flow and trying to lead people that way. Let me just ask you about you. Are you someone who finds it valuable that people sort of do the processing work rather than like, I believed it, now I don't? Like, do you want people to, in their own minds, hearts, whatever, show the math and kind of make their way through it? Because it feels like this book is designed to help people kind of not just conclude differently, but to arrive at a different conclusion.
Yeah, because it's woven into every aspect of Christianity. So it is a hard thing to just switch off, because like I said, it's not like you can't just rip it out. It is like a tumor that sort of, I think, has spread to most of the major organs. And so if you want to get it out, you kind of do have to address the whole system. And so I have a chapter on, why did Jesus live if not to save us from hell? Because, right, he's the savior. What does salvation even mean if there's no hell? Why did Jesus die if there's no hell? We talk about the cross. Does the cross mean anything for us? And so for a lot of people, it can't just be a switch flipped. And so I do kind of walk through all of that. And it was a process for me too. My first step on that road, I was an annihilationist for a little while before I became a universalist.
Yeah, describe that for people who don't even know that there's people who believe in hell, that there's actually a range of what God's punishment, aka hell, sort of means.
So annihilationism is the belief that unbelievers will just be put out of existence. And while I was a pastor, I did a deep dive on hell, because I continued to be very uncomfortable with this. I mean, it always bothered me, and I found myself in my preaching, even though this was what I was supposed to believe, I found that I never talked about hell, and I felt guilty about that. I felt like I should have been talking about it more if this was true, right? My integrity meant that, like, surely if this is true, nothing matters more, actually. And so that cognitive dissonance bothered me, but it really revealed what I couldn't do at the time was listen to my intuition. Actually, my heart knows that this is a wicked doctrine. It's repugnant. It's not worthy of the character of God. And that's why I don't want to talk about it. Instead, I just felt bad, like, oh, am I avoiding the hard things of Scripture? So I did a lot of work on this myself. And the first step was annihilationism, because actually the majority of pictures of sort of the end of the wicked in the Bible, the vast majority of those pictures are not of torture, torment, or suffering. They're of destruction. Over and over again, the wicked are destroyed. And so it's actually very easy to make a biblical case for annihilationism. Edward Fudge has the classic book on that. If you're interested in researching it, it's called The Fire That Consumes. He points out this very obvious fact that throughout the Scripture, fire is not an agent of torture. It's either refinement or consumption. That's what fire does. Fire consumes things. And so that's the annihilationist position. And I was still a pastor when I came to that. And I recount a story in the book where I was a site pastor. So I had a boss, like the senior pastor, right? And our statement of faith at the church had a phrase that said, we believe that unbelievers will suffer forever in hell. And I no longer believed that. And so I had to talk to him about that. And I was really nervous about that conversation because even though annihilationism is still a somewhat conservative position, I know people that have experienced career consequences for even shifting that much. And basically, he received it and he was kind of like, okay, so you don't believe they're going to suffer in hell forever, but he was like, so you believe something bad is going to happen to them, right? And I still think about that moment because I realize now that that's what the evangelical structure demands. There has to be a something bad, there has to be a punishment, and there has to be a them. Something bad has to happen to them. Otherwise, for many evangelicals, why be a Christian at all?
Right. What separates us from them? Yep.
Exactly. It's fundamentally othering. It creates an exclusive, an in-group, an out-group. And so ultimately now the way that I look at, for instance, those verses on destruction is I now see most of those passages as apocalyptic hyperbole, speaking about historical realities, not about afterlife realities. So yes, the Bible says a lot about the wicked being destroyed, and that's because we reap what we sow, and the chickens come home to roost. And when we live outside of God's ways of love and connection, and instead embrace ways of disconnection and violence, that will come back towards us, both personally and in the societies we create, and will fall on other people as well. And we see that even in just, our warmongering culture.
So a few years ago, I was talking to a pastor named John Piper. Do you know who that is? Is that name?
I've heard of him.
Okay. So John was a pastor here. I live in Minneapolis. He's also in Minneapolis. Our churches were near one another. He was running a big conference where they were going to say stuff about the future of Christianity and how some of us doing the work that we were doing, we're not only in the future of Christianity, but we're a threat to it. So we reached out, a friend of mine and I named Tony Jones, we reached out and said, hey, before you do this conference, can we just get together and talk about this stuff so you can at least know us and you can at least, you can have a quote straight from the Doug's mouth. So we go to lunch. They pick the place. We were at the Olive Garden, all you can eat breadsticks. And we're sitting across the table. And I remember John leaning over and saying, he said two things that stick with me. He said, Doug, I've been listening to you talk for a few minutes here, and honestly, I can't understand why anyone would want to listen to you preach. And I thought, have you been talking to my family members? Have you been talking to my wife and kids? And that wasn't the most offensive thing that he said. But then he said something else that was sort of, I thought, insightful to me about his vantage point. He said, you keep telling me about what the Bible says about these things. And this is from John Piper. He said, our call as Christians is not simply to read the Bible. It's also to read the doctrines. Then he quotes 2 Timothy, uses the Bible first, but he said there's the teachings and the doctrines of the church. So he went in this long explanation how the Bible needs to be understood by modern day Christians through the lens of the doctrines taught by the church, That's how we understand it. You don't get to.
They're so squishy with their Protestantism. They just pull that out as necessary.
Yeah, that's right. Because a lot of us, as we get more progressive, are like, hey, let's start talking about the many Christianities, and we don't jump right from the words of Jesus or the hand of the Apostle Paul straight to today. He wasn't writing in the letter to us. But his context was that our faith calls us to the doctrines. And then he looked across the table and said, you have no authority to change the doctrines. Okay, so he's basically pulling doctrinal rank, sort of in some way. Do you ever feel that way? Because the other person that I've heard this from is my friend August Berkshire. And August is the president of the Minnesota Atheist Association. We used to do podcasts and stuff together, and I pal around with the atheists. And he said, Doug, here's the problem with you and all you progressive Christians. You're not really Christians. The real Christians believe, and then he goes into a bunch of doctrines.
Sam Harris does the same thing. Yeah, Sam Harris does the same critique. I think it's a bit of a straw man to for an atheist to topple the straw man after you say, well, the only ones that count are the fundamentalists. Every religion has always had fundamentalists and people that had a more mystical bent within that tradition.
That's it.
That found the deeper truths that are, I think, at the heart of all spiritual traditions. And I don't actually care. The reality is there's no governing body that can determine whether I'm a Christian or not. And if this would bother me more if I thought it was really, really important to be a Christian to be labeled that way. Yeah. That label is not, okay, so I'm not a Christian according to your specific, I literally don't care. I like Jesus. I follow Jesus. I don't care that much about the religion of Jesus that rose after him. I care about the spirituality of Jesus, his connection to God. I want that. I read the book and I'm like, I want what he had. What he had about God, I want that. The way he's taught God, I want to talk about God that way. I want that connection. I want to love people the way Jesus did. I want to move through the world like Jesus. And that's what keeps me Christian.
Okay, but here's what John said about that. And I want to let you take, I'm going to quote a guy from 15 years ago, and then you can take his ideas apart. He said, and I agree with this. He said, you living in, whatever this was, 2006, I don't know, whatever. You can't just think you alone, some pastor of this, little Solomon's porch here, can just go and read the Bible and think you're following Jesus. Like there's a tradition that gave you this Bible, that carried you. Like you don't get to just jump ship and make your own following of Jesus kind of religion. So he's sort of pushing on that. So and my response, we weren't talking specifically about hell, but when it comes to hell, I'm like, oh, there have been Christians all along who never believed in eternal torment and conscious torment. Like, I think you're the one that created a fan fiction of Jesus's teachings and created this other thing.
But how do you do that? Place of uniformity through control and violence. The reality is that prior to Christendom, prior to Constantine's conversion, there was a diversity of opinion about all these things. Yes. Arianism, which, became labeled a heresy at the Council of Nicaea, which was called by Constantine because empires love black and white religion. Empires love rules and order. They love we're right and everybody else is wrong, and we can claim who's right and who's wrong, and we control the truth. We control who gets to be the ones that have the truth because we're the empire. And they enforce that with violence. And I personally, Jesus said that you know a tree by its fruit. And I think if the fruit of something is violence, that if you have to behead people in order to have the truth, and then, I don't know. I just don't, that doesn't hold a lot of water for me. Yeah. When I see that history, ultimately now it's like, hey, there's two of us, Doug, me and you are both. So there's a tradition, there's a lot of, I'm curious about, I want to go back to his statement about why would anyone want to listen to you preach? What do you think he meant by that?
There's no consequence. And there was no historic setting. He's like, so you're just some guy up there saying things. And, and my pushback was, well, I said this more politely, but only slightly more politely than this. But you're just a guy up there pitching John Calvin, a 24-year-old's theology from another time. Like, look, fundamentally, kind of we're all picking our downline, we're all picking our tradition.
And if anything, I would say that, what about this? Here's maybe an approach that would appeal to some of his arguments, is that isn't there safety in a diversity of voices? Like if you look at your tradition and all those guys look kind of the same, they're all Eurocentric, they're all men, they were all powerful men who had cultural power and civic power, you know, the power of the state that Calvin and Luther both had as well. Like, so if you look, it's like, well, all of those seem actually really similar. I wonder if there's actually more wisdom and truth if you have a diversity. So, I listen to womanist theologians. I listen to Black liberation and Hispanic liberation theologians. You could pull people from different continents and different streams, and those are all informing the way that I think now. Maybe that's even like I'm a part of a broader tradition, not a more narrow tradition in some ways.
And that's been true for the history of Christianity, and you know, I'm raised with him, and I do with others very often. There's a reason there are 4 Gospels, and there's a reason even that the people who chose to put the collection of writings together and call them a canon of Scripture have a Matthew and a Mark and a Luke and a John Gospels that don't agree with one another and don't draw the same conclusions and don't tell the same stories. And when they tell the same stories, they don't tell them in the same way, even with the same outcome. So the always in Christianity, it has tried to reject the singularity and move toward the diversity and the pluralism, trying to root the idea that, look, I'm a certain kind of Christian and I'm going to do everything I can to own that. And you're a certain kind of Christian and you can do everything to own that. But most of us don't believe anything. I mean, frankly, whether it's politics or religion or food or what we feel about pickleball, we don't believe things simply because of the facts. We believe them because of what that belief does for us and how it functions in our lives.
Yeah.
And when you get into kind of the human experiential side of any belief system, like if you take belief as a thing that humans do, like we craft up beliefs because we need them to function in some way. And many people want their Christianity to match their own view of the world. And that is, there's good people and there's bad people. Kill them all and let God sort them out in the end. Right? That kind of attitude, we just heard it on, I just heard it on Fox News, which I saw on an internet snippet of a host of Fox News talking about homeless people and saying they either need to follow the programs that are available for them, or I don't know, just unrequested forced euthanizing of them and kill them all. Guy didn't lose his job, by the way. He had to come out and apologize for it, that he sort of, shouldn't have been so crass. But kind of the idea, look, there are just expendable people. And here's the thing, Brian, this is what I'd love your thoughts on. There's always something more important. There's this little passage where just before Jesus is crucified, when the group of religious leaders are together deciding what they're going to do about this reckless heretic. And one of the religious leaders says, wouldn't it be better that one man perish than an entire nation suffer or die? And that idea, that has been around an awfully long time. Wow. And it exists now. Like, hey, it's just the cost of doing business. It's just the cost of the Second Amendment. It's the cost of freedom. Some people it's the cost of righteousness of God that some are going to suffer. Like this kind of callous, everyone doesn't count as the same. That functions for a lot of people as a real operating philosophy.
Yeah,
how do you think about all that?
I think that is the essence of their spirituality in some ways. Yeah. And so when John said that to you, why would I even listen to your preaching? It's so interesting because I actually feel the exact same way about their message, because when I sometimes hear them, I'm sometimes like, whoa, what is your spirituality even for? Yeah. How could this lead me deeper into love, into the heart of Christ, in loving my neighbor as myself? What you're saying is causing me to other my neighbor, to put that distance. So I sometimes wonder, your spirituality is doing the exact opposite of what I see the spirituality of Jesus doing. And that is the spirituality of hell, is what I call it in the book. It is a spirituality of exclusion and othering and scapegoating. And when they're doing that, they've this system of God is going to punish certain people and bless other people, they've come up with a theological system that actually sanctifies that system of scapegoating and othering, where they actually will be able to say that that's a spiritual thing to do to other in that way. And so in many ways, I now see the very things that I thought were spiritual. So for example, growing up, we did tract distribution every Thursday.
Okay.
And my dad was like so good at it. Like he was the guy that would, within 3 minutes, he would get into a conversation with somebody and have them at that point where he's like, if you were to die today, do you know where you would go? And I was so bad at it because I always felt really embarrassed and shy. I would like shove the gospel tract, but like looking down, not making eye contact, because it was just this very aggressive thing that didn't feel good at all. And I felt like a worse Christian for that. I thought my dad was more spiritual than me because he could kind of aggressively jockey in and push his worldview on this other person. So that spiritual framework sanctifies cultural superiority, dominance, a colonial mindset. You're not asking questions about, hey, what do you think? Like, what are some of your cultural values that I could benefit from? No, you're entering into it thinking, I've got heaven, you've got hell, you need what I've got. And you're entering, that is to me the opposite of true spirituality. Jesus was always showing us how we were more similar to other people. And actually the very people that we thought were out, that God was going to destroy, those were the people that we needed to listen to the most. I use as an example several times in the book, probably the most quoted parable that I reference is the Good Samaritan, which is one of my favorite parables. And I think sometimes preachers draw the wrong conclusion from that parable. The typical application is often God loves the Samaritan too. In other words, like the Jewish people were God's chosen people. The Samaritans were heretics. They worshiped in the wrong temple. They had bad doctrine. They were ethnically despised. They were religiously despised. And yet Jesus tells this story that humanizes the Samaritan. So a lot of times the conclusion that's drawn is, wow, God even values and sees the dignity of the Samaritan. But that's true, but that's not actually the point of the story. If that was the point of the story, the Samaritan would have been the person on the side of the road. And it's like we even help and save the Samaritan. But that's not the story. The Samaritan is not saved. The story is not God even saves Samaritans. The Samaritan is the Savior.
Yes.
In other words, the very people that we're tempted to write off as heretics and think that God's not for them. They don't have the right doctrine. They don't have the right theology. I mean, if there was a hell, it was for Samaritans. They had bastardized that religion. And so they were doing it wrong. They were heretics. And yet the point of the story is that that's where your salvation comes from. And those of us who are in a place of cultural superiority, who think we have the answers, we're the ones in need on the side of the road. And we need to get our heads out of our asses and come to those very people that we've been told that we should write off. Yeah. I think of the queer community and how much I've learned from them when I stopped trying to save my queer friends and instead come to see that they understand chosen family. They know how to live from a place of marginalization and still live full, empowered lives. We have so much to learn from them. The church would have so much to learn from them by embracing them. And so when John Piper comes to you and says, I don't even know why we would listen to you preach, because there's no consequences, no punishment, there's no othering, there's no judgment. And in my mind, it's exactly the other way. I don't need anybody to preach to me, to tell me to other more, to judge more, to exclude more.
Right, I'm pretty good at that.
Tribalism comes totally naturally to me.
Right.
I need somebody to help me get my head out of my ass and see myself in my neighbor and my neighbor in myself and realize that we are all made of the same stuff. That's the work of spirituality.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, the Good Samaritan. Yeah, that's beautiful, because the Samaritan story is, Jesus concludes it with, so go be like the Samaritan, right? Not go be like the person on the side of the road. Go be like the one that you've othered. All right, so let me ask you this, Brian, then, and I don't mean to be your therapist or anything, but no, my screen's getting very bright. That's a powerful call to say there are people who we've othered, and we say they don't have anything to offer, and then we spend some time there and we realize they have a lot to offer. Is that same thing true of people who believe in a classic doctrinal view of hell? And what do people like us who don't hold that view, what are we in risk of missing that they uniquely have the chance to see because of the views that they hold?
That's a It's a good question. I will say, first of all, that, Richard Rohr has a quote that's helpful. He says, Jesus never excluded anybody. The only thing Jesus excludes is exclusion itself. And, you have the parable of the prodigal son where everyone's welcome, but the person outside of the party is the person he's too big for his britches. He doesn't want to go into the banquet because of who else was invited. Oh, like the grace is so free that, my younger brother who did all this harm gets to go in. Well, then I'm not going in. In that moment, I'm not sure that there's much to learn from the older brother in that story. I don't know that you can learn from the person who's refusing to get in on the party that God is throwing, if that's the posture. So in that sense, from that particular aspect of that spirituality, because it's not just them. Actually, it is every religious tradition does have a fundamentalist group that usually does say it's our way or the highway. And this goes beyond religion too. There's cultural superiority, white supremacy. It's this same idea that we're better. We have our culture is better. Our white Western culture is all these other cultures are pagan and wicked. And I think whenever you have that attitude of superiority and separation, you are cutting yourself off from your humanity. You're not joining in on that divine dance. And I don't know. I guess I grew up in that. I had that mindset for so long. I can still fall into that mindset. And so I don't know that I can learn much from that particular aspect of the mindset. I need to be continually delivered from it. That being said, there are other aspects to conservative evangelicalism besides their punitive belief in hell. And so maybe I'm missing it. Maybe there is something there. I think that the aspect of justice, the fact that harm does matter, there's something there for sure.
Yep.
But how often is it not even connected to justice? Like, for example, they're conservative evangelicals with, Trump, oh, he's a baby Christian, we'll welcome him right into the fold. I mean, the worst people, will be welcomed in immediately if they can offer power to that movement, and if they can serve the movement, and if they're willing to say the right things at certain times. While that same grace is often not extended to people, of color or marginalized communities or people that are outside of that group. So it's not even consistent in that way of justice. Like some of the greatest harms are overlooked. Abuse is often overlooked in churches. Some of these churches will have, when a pastor gets an underage girl pregnant, she's the one apologizing in front of the church, not the pastor. And that kind of pattern is so common, and it reveals like a hypocrisy even in the way that punishment is executed. So
are you familiar with a philosopher named Ken Wilber? Is most famous for being connected to something called spiral dynamics. Are you familiar with that world at all?
I don't think so. No.
You might find it interesting. It's non-religious philosophy of human flourishing, and one of Ken's notions is to think about the world in a spiral instead of a continuum, which is right out of the chutes, it's like, okay, that gets interesting. Like what if our metaphor was different? But then he talks about the need, he uses colors to sort of describe levels of spiritual growth and how people go from sort of one level of, which a lot of us see, it's kind of what you see in the development of, leaving the innocence of the Garden of Eden and sort of moving into human spiritual development and flourishing. You see it in children where they move from sort of a black and white world and needing to name everything and this is mine, and then moving into a world of generosity. Like there's human development theory is what it basically is. But he has this great phrase where he says, we have to transcend our backgrounds and we have to include our backgrounds. Because if we don't transcend, we stay stuck in ideas that aren't going to serve us well. And if we don't include, we just stay bitter and angry. Yeah. So his call is for people to find some way to purify, carry it forward, this kind of thing. And it's just a really helpful way without making excuse or permission giving. I mean, it's what a lot of people who go through treatment sort of have to do, or they go through some kind of mental or spiritual growth. And they're like, okay, there's a bunch of things I've left back there that I just couldn't deal with for a while. And one of the things I've wondered about, not kind of hell, but hell the way you've talked about it, how it functions for religious people as a foundational kind of root thing. Somewhere in there's an impulse to care about somebody else that you don't know. Right? Like there's a core, yes, there's a core impulse that the punishment, like the means of inclusion is ridiculous. But, your dad walking up to people on the street, giving a shit about somebody else's eternal. There's a lot of progressive Christians that kind of move through the world, dropping all care or concern about anybody else. Like, I'm not going to interfere with anyone's thinking. I'm just going to ask them what they think. I'm not going to offer much to them. It's just, we're just going to move through life. And there's an awful lot of people who are looking around and saying to progressive Christians and others, political spaces and religious spaces and cultural spaces, like, hey, we're dying out here. Anybody got a better idea? In our work, we have a lot of people say to us at Vote Common Good, like, could you be a moral voice on these political issues? Because religious leaders have a chance to take a moral stance. Because there's kind of a lack of moral grounding, in other places. So I sort of wonder if those of us who've moved beyond punishment narratives couldn't also, I don't know, have a little zip, have a little passion, have a little like, hey, there's some good news that doesn't come with a punch to the back of the head. There's some
better news,
and somehow
we can actually evangelize.
Yeah, we lose, but people don't. Here's the thing, Brian. I would love to. I mean, you do. That's partly why I reached out to you, because I saw you on Instagram and then realized you were connected to all these people that I knew. So I was following you there. But anybody, when I find any pastor type person that's like on the internet and saying something to the world, like, hey,
that's fun.
Jump in this water over here. Cause so many people, Brian, they drop the burden of all this stuff. And then they're just like, now I'm just going to work on my inner life. And I don't blame them at all. It's just, we're not doing well if nobody's helping the other out there.
That is a really interesting thought. I like this reframe, because I think I've thought about this. Like, why do I not stop talking about this? Why am I still yapping about this? And I think there's a lot of levels. One is the good thing that you just mentioned. That's like the good. I think there's like some unhealed trauma probably too, where I literally was told from an early age that you've got to evangelize, you've got to preach the gospel. It's a heaven and hell issue. Your life has to count for something, What's the Jim Elliot quote that was shoved down my throat? I'm trying to remember right now. Only what's done for Christ will last. Only one life will soon be passed. Only what's done for Christ will last. I was given these high stakes and this need to evangelize from early on. And I wonder if even after shifting from some of those punitive frameworks, I can't drop the urgency of the message. Is still kind of like, well, what else am I going to do? Like, literally, I've been shaped from the earliest of ages that my life has to count for something. And so I think there can be like a savior complex that can be a bad thing that we should be aware of, especially as like straight white guys who had like platforms in evangelicalism. I want to be aware of the way that I hold my platform. I want to be pointing to other voices and that sort of thing. Like, I don't want to think that I just have the answers. That being said, I think you're right to say, man, I thought I had good news before. And I mean, I was talking to a guy on a plane the other day. I got into a conversation about hell with a guy on the plane that I was sitting next to. He started it, okay?
Okay, all right. Sure.
Yeah, I'm not the guy that just starts conversations on planes. But I ultimately asked him, because he believed in hell, and he was asking me like why I didn't believe in hell. And I basically asked him, like, according to your framework, based on what you believe that it's only through Jesus, if Jesus were to come back right now and end the world and we all went to either heaven or hell, would there be more people in hell or heaven? And he was ultimately like, yeah, I guess there'd be more people in hell. And I was like, I just don't think that's good news, man. I think we could do better than that. And so, yeah, in some ways, it's like my news wasn't even good then. We've got better news. I think it's worth sharing that there's a gracious God reconciling the whole world to God's self, that love is for everybody, and that anybody can get in on this. And so, yeah, I do think that it's worth yapping about.
Yeah, and I love that. And I love the fact, like, when I heard you say your dad was this person who was really good at just walking up to somebody, and man, he could kick in within 3 minutes, he's on point. And then I'm like, and you can turn on a camera, Brian, you can point it at your face, and within 14 seconds, you are into it. Like, that is you and your dad do it differently, you're saying different things, but boy, you are part of you're part of the flow. And I bet you hear this all the time. So I want to ask you about your Instagram profile and all that stuff, because it's so powerful. I bet you hear from people on the regular saying things like, I'm so glad to hear you. Where are more voices like you? It's about time. Like so many people in our culture and world are begging for somebody with some religious background and interest to say something. Is that true? And do you feel that when you turn your camera on? Because for all the people that think, you want to be like some Christian influencer, that's not a way to make a living. Like being a Christian influencer doesn't put money in your
Especially on
bank
Instagram,
account.
Meta doesn't pay their creators at all.
No, you are running, a platform for other companies to sell their ads and whatever. We all do it. We're doing it with this right now. This is going to go out that way. I'm not critiquing it, just naming it. So you're doing it for something else. Do you feel that thing where people are saying to you, so
Deeply.
glad someone is saying something?
Oh, at first when I started sharing, it was kind of a cathartic thing. I was sharing my story, and I didn't exactly have a trajectory, but hearing from, at this point, doing this for a few years, I've heard from thousands of people, at this point, that I've encouraged them in some way with my story, and there is, I think, a hunger, especially because the Christian nationalist movement is winning right now in our country. And so I say this sometimes, that the face of Christianity in America is basically Donald Trump. That is what, so you have an antichrist figure that's representing Christ for people. And so it's kind of a layup for those of us who don't think that that's an accurate representation of Jesus. It's actually not hard. We don't have to you don't have to make stuff up. Like Jesus himself, just pointing at his life, the way Jesus lived and loved, what Jesus prioritized in his ministry. At every point, it defies what's being held up as what a Christian nation should be.
Yep.
And so it's not hard to say, like, Jesus is better than this. And there are so many people who have given up on the church, and they think that they have to give up on Jesus too. And I think it is encouraging to know, okay, actually, Jesus is still mine if I want him to be. And I never try to be pushy with people. Like, I don't need you to believe in Jesus. I don't think that you're fucked unless you believe in Jesus in this particular way. But what I will say is that nobody can take Jesus from you, because the people that are misrepresenting Jesus, they don't get to have the final say.
That's right.
On who Jesus is.
Yeah, I feel that way about. Thank you. That's so helpful, and I think other people will benefit from hearing that too. Right? That's reinforcing. Right? It's a version also of what you would hear in your other churches and growing up. Like, hey, your faith, no one's going to shake it. No one's going to take it. Don't let the world bang you down. Saying at a camp, like when you go back to school, like you can hear those, because that's true, right? That you, as a valuable human being, carry something as a gift, and it's not commoditized in a way you only have so much and someone's going to take it and you're going to have less. It's expansive. It's growing. It's a whole different thing. And I feel that way, frankly, about being Christian. I tell people I am Christian, and I even tell people I'm an evangelical, and there's lots of reasons for it. Some of them are marketing, but also it's just true. And I've watched the squatters move into Christianity and into the cul-de-sac of evangelicalism that I lived in. Squatters moved in, and the tenants and owners moved out, and we turned it over to these people. And I am not going to turn this over to the Christian nationalists and to the people who want to tell a different story. And for some of us, that's just our thing, right? We're just going to be the last people hanging around, saying doesn't have to be this way.
People say, a few things. They'll ask me why don't you explore another religious tradition? And I have benefited from other religious traditions, but at the end of the day, I was raised as a Christian, and I don't need to culturally appropriate someone else's tradition when my own tradition
there you go.
has the good stuff. Like Jesus himself is a great spiritual teacher, and so I don't need to be I don't need to be culturally superior with my tradition and say I'm going to beat everybody else on the head until they all become Christians. No. But I can own my tradition without having to say, oh, I need to now enter into someone else's. So Christianity is just my spiritual language. Other people will then say, well, why not just deconstruct all the way and be an atheist, And for me, the answer is super simple. And it's that I believe in God. And the nice thing about not believing in a punishing God is I don't believe in God because I have to believe in God. I don't believe in God because if I didn't believe in God, then I might go to hell. I just believe in God because I honestly, when I look at the world, the experiences that I've had, I still can't help but believing in God. And so if I didn't believe in God, if I stopped, if it didn't make sense to me anymore, I would let that go, but I haven't because I still believe.
Right. And it's such a curious question, right? Because you're like, as if your beliefs are something you are in full control of.
Totally.
Like, as if you can just decide, like that light switch, I'm just going to shut that off now. Like, I don't know if anybody else's beliefs about anything function like that. Like, aren't we all sort of doing the best we can with what we believe? And we're, I believe in God. It's been a real problem for me, or I believe in God and it's working out all right. Or I have a conflicted relationship with my own beliefs. Like, beliefs visit us and they join us and they dominate us sometimes. And sometimes we have to work hard to let them go. It's not like you can just decide, which is part of the thing that I'm sure for you in writing this book, because you said it was a cathartic and all the rest, but writing a book like Hellbent, look, theology is biography. That's a really good thing. There's a reason your name, Brian Recker, is underneath the title Hellbent. This is your take. This is you saying a thing. That's what all the social media stuff is. It's just you have a thing to offer. It doesn't have to be everyone's thing. It doesn't have to be the final word. You're working out a few things, and other people who are working those things out might want you as a journey partner. But we don't get to just decide. It's not that easy, which is why I have a lot of grace for the people who are in Christian religion that's now brought them Donald Trump. Like, many, many, many people I know don't want that to be true, but they're stuck in there and they don't know how to get out. And they truly, truly don't. I know it's easy to say, well, because if you've never had that problem, if you've never thought like that or believed like that, it's easy for people to think that can't be a real problem someone has. It's a real problem some people have. They can't just leave their beliefs behind. Wouldn't that be great if we could just swap them out?
I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I don't want to be reductionistic, but I do think hell is a big one. I think that it is a trump card that justifies all kinds of things. And so, you look at something like that happening and you can overlook a lot of moral rot when you think that you alone have the keys essentially to the afterlife.
Yep. Well, Brian, thank you for this. Thank you for the book. It's out in the world now, friends, and you can download it, you can read it, you can purchase it.
Listen to it. I did the audio, so I got a little fired up a few times. I think it'll be a good audio experience as well. Have
you listened back to the audio of it yourself? Have you gone the audio journey?
No, it's not out yet, so that'll be interesting. I felt good while I was doing it, but no, I haven't gotten to hear it yet. Is that a weird feeling? I'm not sure if I'm going to like that, actually.
It's more weird. It's more weird than listening to yourself on a recording because no one's reading voice. Like a lot of people feel like, oh, if I hear myself talking, I'm like, is that really what I sound like? And some of us have just become comfortable with that, right? You've just listened to yourself enough on the recording and you've created a third person observer for you when you're recording something. But when you're reading, we all read differently. And because you don't read like you talk, right? That's one of the things.
I tried to. I wanted to sound really natural, but no, you're right. I had to slow down a lot because I'm quite a fast talker.
Yep. And you slow down and it's reading, right? You're reading someone a book. You're not doing another thing. It's an audio book. It's not your audio. This is an audio summation. There's lots of other audio summations you might do. But anyway, it's a curious thing. And
I'm excited to check it out. I wonder if I get a free copy of that. I'll have to figure that out.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah,
I mean, people that think that books, that authors just get all this, it's kind of yours and you're in it with your publisher. It's like, well, I don't know. You're trying to figure out when you can get a copy and how much is it going to cost you and what do you have to do with it? Like it's a strange relationship that you have to this thing you spent so much time with thinking about on your
and it'll be
computer
interesting
screen.
how it evolves. I don't have all the answers. I don't give all the answers. I hope my book raises a lot of questions. I hope that you disagree with it. I hope you wrestle with the argument in it. And who knows, in 10 years I might revisit it and I might disagree with half of it. And I think that that's okay, because what I hope this book invites people to is a more curious spirituality. And punishment makes that really difficult. Hell makes that really difficult. One of my favorite things about deconstructing hell is that you realize it's not about being right about everything. You're not going to die and get a God test, and if you get some of the answers wrong, you go to hell. That's not the point. You don't have to be right. So I don't care if I'm wrong, actually. When it comes to my beliefs, a better question than is this right? Is this right? Does this line up with John Piper's doctrines? Is this helping me grow in love? Is this loving? Is this helping me love my neighbors as myself and love God, love the God that I encounter in the world, in people? I hope that this helps you grow in love.
Well, other books, as you mentioned, have been written about this, and some have been made famous by people being against him. So I'll just simply say farewell, Brian Recker. Farewell.
Yes. Boy, I hope John
insider
Piper
joke.
that would make my day.
He's long moved on from all this kind of stuff. But as we know in all worlds, individuals fill slots. The individual matters. They make a lot of impact. But as soon as one commentator is gone, somebody else is going to slide in. As soon as one firebrand preacher is dominating the cultural landscape and they move on, somebody else just slides in. So there's somebody else out there who's going to find out about your book and tell you that you are the one that, no one should listen to what you have to say, and they can't possibly understand why you would. So
that would be a badge of honor. I told my girlfriend the other day that, I'd love to be a New York Times bestseller, but you know what I'd like even more is to get a negative review in Christianity Today. Like, I want them to be mad about my book. I think that would just make my day.
Yeah, maybe target Charisma magazine. You probably have a better chance of those people really going after you from watching one of their own, sort of. All right, hey buddy, thank you. And if people want to follow you on the other places, like they need me to tell you that if they can't look up Brian Recker on the internet, but where should people go if they want that kind of thing?
Instagram primarily is at BE Recker. And then the other place I'd point you to is my Substack. I write somewhat regularly. I try to post about once a week. My Substack is called Beloved with Brian Recker, so you can look that up. And I do different meditations on different Bible passages, the way of Jesus, and also some cultural commentary as well.
Well, thanks for giving an hour to talk to the people on the Common Good podcast, man. We really appreciate you.
Thanks so much for having me, Doug. Appreciate your work, man.
All right. Hey, hang tight. I'm going to push the button, and then it's going to go black, and then we're going to be back. Because, friends, if you've been watching this the whole time, once again, this was a pre-record because I'm squirreled away in Mexico somewhere. But if this is meaningful to you in the chat that's going on, glad you were conversating with each other in the chat. All right.